In the hushed whispers of a suburban neighborhood, where the mundane meets the mysterious, Sarah's mother lived through an encounter that would chill the bones of even the most skeptical. The street was like any other, lined with homes filled with ordinary lives, yet it was touched by an inexplicable presence that seemed to drift from one house to the next, leaving a trail of unanswerable questions. A few doors down from where Sarah's mother lived as a teen, a family was struck by a heart-wrenching tragedy. Their daughter, a bright spark extinguished too soon, succumbed to an aneurysm after retiring one night with nothing but a headache. The grief that followed was a shadow that darkened their doorstep, and in an attempt to escape it, even for a moment, the family sought refuge away from the home that now harbored such sorrow. The duty of care for the family's pets was left to Sarah's uncle, a man of stoic composure, who entered the silent house with a heavy heart. Accompanying him were Sarah's mother and her father, young and in love, unaware that they were stepping into a story that would become a chilling anecdote for years to come. While the men descended into the bowels of the house, where the air was cool and still, Sarah's mother was drawn to the grand piano that sat solemnly in the living room. It was an elegant piece, one that had once resonated with the laughter and music of a family now fractured by loss. As her fingers graced the ivory keys, a melody began to fill the void, a haunting tune that seemed to stir the very air around her. It was then that she felt it, a brush against her ankles, soft and fleeting. A rational mind would think of the pets, curious and seeking attention, but when the sensation came again, it was no gentle nudge but the unmistakable grip of hands, firm and insistent. A surge of terror raced through her veins as she peered beneath the piano, expecting to confront the source of her unease. But there was nothing, only the echo of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. When the invisible hands clasped her legs once more, she knew this was no mere trick of the mind. With a scream caught in her throat, she fled to the basement door, her voice a desperate plea as she summoned her companions. Outside, under the scrutiny of the sun, her uncle listened to her tale, his face draining of color as the pieces fell into place. He spoke of the daughter, whose spirit seemed to linger, bound to the piano where she once played a loving game with her father. It was a game of joy and giggles, now twisted into a macabre mimicry that spoke of a bond unbroken by death. In the wake of Sarah's mother's harrowing encounter, the fabric of her reality began to unravel. The once dismissed tales of the supernatural that she had heard as a child now gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, refusing to be ignored. The experience at the piano had been a chilling brush with the other side, but it was only the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the incident refused to fade into the past. Sarah's mother started noticing odd occurrences around her own home, objects moving without explanation, cold spots appearing in random corners, and the faint sound of piano music drifting through the halls at night. Each peculiar event was a sinister echo of that day, a reminder that something had followed her from the house of tragedy. It wasn't long before the whispers started. Soft and indistinct at first, they grew louder and more insistent, always just out of reach of understanding. They seemed to be calling to her, beckoning her to return to the house where the boundary between life and death had been so thin. Against her better judgment, Sarah's mother found herself drawn back to the house. The family that had lived there was long gone, having abandoned the place that had become a vessel for their grief. The house stood empty, a silent sentinel guarding the memories within. As she stepped inside, the air grew thick, charged with an energy that made her skin crawl. The whispers grew louder, now clearly the voice of the young girl, pleading for her to come to the piano. Compelled by a force she couldn't resist, Sarah's mother found herself sitting before the grand instrument once again. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling with fear. When she finally pressed down, the notes that filled the room were not of this world. They were discordant and mournful, a symphony of sorrow that seemed to seep into the very walls. That's when she saw her, the ghostly figure of the girl, her eyes hollow with longing. She was trapped, bound to the house by the game she had once played in life. With each note Sarah's mother played, the spirit grew more agitated, her form flickering violently. The room spun, the temperature plummeted, and a darkness descended, swallowing all light. In the blackness, Sarah's mother felt hands upon her once more, not just at her ankles this time, but all over her body, pulling her, dragging her down into an abyss from which there was no escape. When Sarah's mother didn't return home, a search party was formed. They found her the next day, unconscious on the piano bench, her fingers still resting on the keys. She awoke with no memory of the night before, but she was never the same. Her eyes held a depth of terror that no words could convey, and she spoke of voices that never ceased, of hands that clung to her in the dark. The house was condemned soon after, left to decay in its solitude. But the locals say that if you walk past it on a quiet night, you can still hear the faint sound of a piano playing, and the soft, desperate cries of a child calling out from beyond the veil.